I saw a marsh hawk. Of course, I didn't know what it was back then, but I saw a marsh hawk fly real low across the ground when I was in 12 or 11 or 12 years old, and I tried to follow it, and it landed. So I tried to. I got within probably about 20 feet of it, and it was sitting there eating a mouse, and I was just totally fascinated with it. So that's when I went back home, and I went through some of those magazines, and I said, "Dad, please, I want a hawk."
Yeah.
Well, you ain't getting one. Go get a pigeon. So that's what I did. I went out and got me a pigeon.
3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone. Welcome back for another fun-filled episode of the Falconry Told Podcast. I'm here today with Tim Neese. He's another local guy here in Evansville, and he's a guy that's been in falconry since, what'd you say, the 70s? Is that correct?
1971.
1971. He even remembers he probably remembers the same exact month and everything else, too, don't you?
Well, I know it was close to November because I'm an artist, and in school, I was always painting pictures of hawks and birds. So one of the local guys around the Folsomville area had found a hawk that had been shot. And he knew I was interested in hawks, so he brought the bird over. It was about a 3 or 4 year old red-tailed female. And it didn't have any broken bones, so the wing healed up pretty good over about a 6-month period. But I had no idea how to train a bird.
Right.
So me and my brother and Don Andrews and a few of the others, we were going out on these bird excursions with Willard Gray. He was a county extension agent at the time. And he was a bird watcher.
Okay.
But he knew that I was interested in birds. We went to Land Between Lakes and we watched the eagles and all that kind of stuff. You know, I was 16, 17 years old.
Still pretty young then.
Yeah. Pimples all over my face, hair down on my shoulders.
Yeah.
I mean.
Yep.
But I called him up and asked him about this bird, so he got a hold of a game warden for me. The game warden came out, and he gave me permission to keep it. And then he got a hold of Bob Bottomley, who's also local, who's been in falconry forever.
Bob's a good guy. Good guy.
And so I called up Bob Bottomley. I went out there to meet him and his wife, and he told me that he couldn't train the bird for me. I'd have to train it myself, but if I bought his book off him, I would, for $10. In 1971, $10 was, you know,
yeah,
for a 15-year-old.
Right.
$10.
Right.
But
yeah.
I bought the book from him. I took it home and I read it. In fact, I still have the book.
Wow.
And it's a very good book on how to train passage redtails. And even ice redtails, and whatever else you want to train. You know, it's a book that is still relevant today if somebody were to read it, I think.
That's cool.
And but anyway, I read the book. I trained this haggard redtail, and I caught 4 or 5 rabbits with it, and I turned it loose.
Okay.
And then I went out and took Actually, I got a bird from another mutual friend of Bob Bottomley's. I think it was Kurt Eicher, actually, who I got Dina from. I can't remember exactly who I got the bird from, but she was an ice redtail. And she turned out to be a really great hawk. I mean, I ended up catching 17 rabbits with her the first year, which in those days was a lot. I mean, Bob Bottomley used to catch 20 and 25 rabbits a year, and that was a big deal back in 1970 to catch that many rabbits a year.
Well, I'm sure back then, you know, I mean, it's amazing how much terrain and how many spots and everything else that we've lost, even in the last 5 years. I can only imagine since, you know, the 70s, you know, how things have changed with terrain and everything. I'm sure things were a lot woolier and a lot more open, and I don't know, I'm sure it was a lot different, you know, as far as how it all was back then with all that. And I'm sure the focus probably wasn't quite on the numbers to a certain degree too.
No, the focus back then was on doing your bird right.
Right, yeah.
And training the bird and getting it out. And
which is the way it should be.
And I would come home every day from school and take Dina out. As soon as I got off the bus, I lived on about a 40 acres my dad had out in Folsonville area, and most of it was woods. And I would just fly. She would follow me through the woods. And every now and then I'd throw the lure out to her. And she became a very strong, powerful flyer by getting her out every day and doing that with her. I mean, I'd probably, until it got dark.
Sure.
And every now and then we'd kick a rabbit up and she'd catch one. But most of her rabbits were caught in town that Bob Bottomley and Janice Bottomley would show us. And we ended up getting into the old dump there on First Avenue.
Okay, yeah.
Which was loaded with them.
Yeah.
So the second year I had Dina, and Dina was flown mostly off the fist. I didn't fly because the old dump, there weren't no trees hardly out there. So we had to fly those birds off the fist, and she became very good off the fist. And she ended up catching like 75 rabbits her second year, which back in those days, that was
unheard of.
Well, I'm not going to say it was unheard of nationally, but it was unheard of in Evansville, Indiana.
For here, yeah.
And
I got you.
But she turned out to be a really great hawk. In fact, she won the 1976, the last competitive meet.
The NAFA meet.
The NAFA meet. I actually took 2 birds of that meet. I took an immature red tail with me that I was kind of trying to get going. She ended up catching 4 or 5 rabbits herself. But Dina ended up catching 20 rabbits and actually won the meet.
Nice.
Which was, for a 20-year-old, I think I was 21 in 76. That was a big deal for me.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's something that you bring up something there that I'm not really sure how many people are aware of that or not, that the NAFA meets even, the younger guys like me, until I think it was actually you that told me about that story before. I didn't realize that they even had competitive, hunts and everything at the NAFA meets back then. So, how did that work exactly? I mean,
well, you had to have somebody that was like a field marshal, and Bob Bottomley was one of their field marshals. So they had to be out there with you as you caught these rabbits, and they had to certify that each one of those catches were a catch.
Yeah.
So you had to have somebody with you that NAFA said, okay, this guy can be.
Gotcha. Okay.
So Bob Bottomley was that guy. He was in St. Louis, so there was a lot of rabbits in St. Louis.
Gotcha.
So, I mean, Eddie Morgan had a goshawk that year that was neck and neck with me and Dina. And he caught 6 rabbits, 6 rabbits, and 6 rabbits. 6 per day for 3 days. I caught 6, 4, and then 6. So I was 2 behind him. And he was definitely going to win that meet with that goshawk. Except it got sick.
Oh.
And then it died from asper.
Jeez.
And me and him used to argue all the time which was the better, the goshawk or the red tail. And of course, back then, nobody could convince me that anything was better than a red tail. So
this sounds really familiar.
And he said, yeah, but my bird died. I said, well, that's why red tails are better than goshawks. Because goshawks tend to die. But there's no doubt that Eddie Morgan, if his bird hadn't died from asper, would have won that meet.
Gotcha.
Because that bird was, I hate to admit it, but she was better than that red tail as far as catch. Because what happened with the red tail was she'd catch 6 rabbits and she'd be fed up pretty good. So the next day she wasn't so dang hungry.
Right.
So she'd only catch 4. And she ended up catching 6, 4, 6, and 4. So but I was proud of her.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's cool. I mean, that's what were the next, do you remember, like what was it, more red tails that were kind of like the runners up to you guys, or do you remember it all? Or?
Usually it was the red tails that ended up winning the meets. And I think the reason why is they're just a calmer bird, and the goshawks seem to be, well, they can die on you. They get sick.
Yeah.
The trips are hard on them.
Right.
People used to really push the birds, and I think the reason why they ended the competition I think some of the guys were pushing their birds beyond really where they should have been pushed. So they decided that in the best interest of the birds themselves, they decided that they weren't going to do the competitions anymore. And that was probably a good thing, really. Because I didn't have to. Dina didn't need that pushing. She just loved to hunt.
Yeah.
But some of the guys probably were pushing their birds a little bit much. I'd say Eddie Morgan was probably one of those that pushed his bird. So maybe could be a reason why the bird
just kept it too low for too long.
May have had the bird just a hair too low. I didn't know anything about goshawks at the time.
Right, yeah.
So I couldn't really say.
Well, plus, the trip at the beginning stresses them, keeping them low stresses them, hunting them that, even
But
though...
after having goshawks, and I love goshawks now, they are, in my opinion, one of the best. As far as jackrabbit hunting, that is the most fun. Jackrabbits and goshawks, I think they pretty much put everything else to shame as far as just out there having fun. It looks like a bronco rider on a jackrabbit. It's just, they're usually really good long flights. Some of them are short. Depends on where the jackrabbit gets up from, but it's always fun. And yeah, I agree. It's the stark difference between whenever I flew the Harrises, on the just watching the difference in the flight styles between the Corvette versus the or whatever. It's definitely nice, and entertaining to watch for sure, because it's if nothing else for me, it's always real fun seeing their reaction time, which is nothing. And other birds, they might be a little bit more, they might think about it a little bit more, just be a little bit more calculating. A gosh sees that slightest flinch of movement, those jackrabbit ears pop up or whatever, that thing's gone. It's not even thinking twice about it. And it's always fun to see that, and compared to say your red tails and Harrises and stuff, I think. But well, the Harris Hawks, they're very good at it. It's just the flights aren't, in my opinion. I'm sure a Harris Hawk guy would tell you I'm full of whatever.
Right.
The Harris Hawks, the flight style for me isn't as exciting as a goshawk, and the red tail on jackrabbits ain't either. No. But I have seen some red tails, and I have seen some Harris Hawks that are pretty spectacular flyers and are really fun to watch.
Yeah. No, I think that there's and also the flip side of that too is I've also seen some goshawks that really weren't all that exciting.
Well, I've seen some goshawks I've seen goshawks that I've had goshawks that were worthless. And I've heard people say that you can turn any goshawk into a good hawk. Well, maybe.
Yeah.
I wasn't able to. There were some goshawks and I've flown a lot of goshawks. I don't know what the count is, but somewhere close to 25 maybe, and I've had probably 7 what I would consider great goshawks, and most of them were good goshawks, a couple mediocres. In fact, the first one I had, Laramie, which I took in 1979, was a mediocre goshawk. The most rabbits she ever caught was 50. She would pick and choose the flight she wanted, but when she decided she wanted one, she could catch him, no problem.
Yeah, it wasn't getting away.
And then when I took her to Texas on jackrabbits, she was great. She loved jackrabbits. Now, I went out there the first time with her and caught 3 jackrabbits with her, and I thought that was, great.
Yeah.
And we took a red tail out there with us, a passage red tail, and she caught 2. So we ended up catching 5 jackrabbits that year, me and Brent Maurer. But the goshawks were, Laramie she took off for one flight. It was about a good 100 yards, and she was smoking after this jackrabbit. And just before it hit the fence line, she hit it right in the head and just stopped it cold. Which was, I thought, was just awesome.
Bet you're a little puckered, though, as it got closer to the fence line a little bit, though, right?
Yeah, when I started getting that close to fence line, especially Goshawks, you're like, oh, no. Oh, okay, it's all right.
Yeah, there's nothing like that feeling of, of either that devastation or that calm sigh of relief afterwards after, you just didn't watch your bird collide with something and die on impact, instantly. But
but I took a mediocre goshawk on cottontails, and she was a really, in my opinion, then a great hawk on jackrabbits. Now, I only went back out there one more time with her, and she caught 2 the second time out there, 2 or 3. I think she ended up catching 6 altogether. But for me, that was, nowadays some of these guys like Mark Herman goes out there and catches 19 in a week. That would have been unheard of to catch that many jackrabbits.
It's not that great, though. Let's just be honest. We can't. We have to temper this down just a smidge because he's going to listen to this. You realize that?
Well, Mark Herman, to be quite honest, was a very pleasant surprise for me and Joe, because I remember when he first asked, I think he had found, or somebody had found, an injured bird. And, me and Joe, he was a big-time deer hunter, turkey hunter. We kind of discussed that, and we thought, he's not going to have time for falconry. He spends all his time deer hunting and turkey hunting and all that, and yeah, we'll give him a shot. He probably won't work out like most of them don't, but we'll see. And then he just takes off and flies with it, and he really outdoes everybody.
Yeah.
And he's become a really great falconer, and me and Joe are both really proud of the dude.
Yeah. Well, it's always, if nothing else, you just want to see a decent turnaround for the time that you put into people.
Yeah,
that's
right. It's like Bob Bottomley. He's the one who got me and Joe into it, and I've heard Bob Bottomley say several times that he's really proud of the fact that he helped me and Joe get into falconry.
Yeah, well,
we met Eddie Morgan through Bob, and Eddie Morgan's the one who took me and Brent Maurer out to Wyoming in 1979, where I got Laramie, my first goshawk. And that was really kind of a weird trip, really, because we get up there, we get on the main road, and he's already shown us some of these old goshawk nests up some of these ravines, so he's kind of showing us how they nest. And we're on this main road, and all of a sudden, old Eddie Morgan yells out, "Yonder she is!" Like he'd just seen a well or something. And we kind of, where? So he pulls over, and there's a nest right there on the side of this main road. It's a gravel road, but it's Snowy Ridge or Snowy Range Road to the Laramie Mountains. And it's a main road going through the mountains there, which we didn't expect to see a goshawk just nesting right there 20 feet off the road.
Well, yeah. No, you usually have to go over about 50 miles of deadfall, and
well, you usually have to walk. That's what me and Joe ended up doing. Me and Joe ended up going out there, and I kind of showed Joe what Eddie showed me, which was not that much really.
Yeah.
And then me and Joe carried that further, kind of like most of the young falconers do. We teach them what and then they make it better. Yeah. And that's kind of how it goes. Yeah. And that's kind of how it went with me and Joe. We were taught by Bob Bottomley and Eddie Morgan and some of the older guys, and then we learned how to do it just a little bit better.
Yeah. Well, that's what, as the old saying goes, it seems to be the burden of any teacher, and that the student eventually, if they're a good student, grows past what,
and they do,
grows past what you are, and
that happens.
Have to come to terms with that,
right? I'm 64 years old now, so I'm at the point where I don't have the energy to get out there and trounce around, and I just don't have that. I don't have the. Well, I've had 3 back operations. I just had one 10 weeks ago, so
right.
It's time for the younger guys to get out there and keep the sport going.
Yeah. Well, and that's part of the reason why like Israel, when he started this podcast and stuff, X amount of months ago, and I started joining him doing it. That's really the main motivation behind it is, part of what keeps that going and what keeps people motivated and interested and going and stuff is, well, hearing about, like hearing the stories like those NAFA meet stories and these other stories and stuff, because let's face it, if there's no initial interest in your that kind of little thing in your brain isn't piqued, you know what I mean, to kind of stimulate it to kind of even get into this, I mean, who would? I mean, it's a lot of it's really cool once you find out about it and get into it, but I don't have to tell you that 8 or 9 out of every 10 guys that's going to approach you about it, they see how much work and BS it is, and they don't make it. No, and they don't make it. So, if there's not even that initial spark or that peak of interest,
it needs to be that way.
Yeah.
It needs to be. I'm not saying it needs to be hard to get into falconry, but it needs to be hard enough where if somebody wants to get into it, they have to work at it. For instance, you can't go out and do everything. Just like Bob told me, I'm not going to train your bird for you, Tim.
Sure.
But I'll sell you my book for $10, and then you can learn how to do it yourself.
It's so funny. I can see Bob doing that. It cracks me up.
I mean, $10 wasn't even much back then, really. It was to a 17-year-old. It wasn't to a 29-year-old.
Right.
I can remember going home and telling Mom and Dad, well, what was that Bob and Janice like? I said, well, they're an older couple.
In their 20s.
They're really nice.
Yeah.
They're in their 20s. To me, they were an older couple. So
Yeah. It is funny how your perspective on that changes. Whenever you become the older, the older whatever.
Back in those days before the federal laws came in, we couldn't even fly passage red tails. Mm-hmm. We could only take ices.
Yeah.
So we got quite good at flying ice red tails.
Yeah.
Like I said, Dina was an ice red tail.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I guess, 1975 when the federal regs went in. We could finally go out and trap a passage red tail, and we found out, man, this is a lot easier.
This bird isn't quite so inclined to try and eat my face off.
Well, Dina wasn't like that though. Dina was a sweetheart.
Mm-hmm.
She was so. I mean, we used to ride them on the back of our seats, me and Brentwood in his Chevy, and she got so tame. In fact, when we went to McDonald's, she would start her tweeting, and she would get all excited because she loved strawberry milkshakes. And I'm not kidding. As soon as she saw the arches, she would start. So we'd go in there and get our hamburger, and I'd always get a strawberry milkshake, and she'd be sitting there tweeting how they'd carry on when they want something, making that tweety noise and stuff, and kind of leaning over, wanting me to hurry up, and Brent goes, would you hurry up and give her So I would drink the milkshake down to there's about a third left, and I'd cut the cup off a little bit so she could, and she would just dip her head down in there and just start swallowing that stuff, and she looked forward to that.
That's funny. So that didn't affect her at all, huh?
No, we'd go out and she'd still catch 5 or 6 rabbits. I mean, she just loved to hunt. And when you get a bird that just loves to hunt, they make you look good.
Well, yeah, because, I mean, obviously that's half the battle is even getting them to want to do that.
I was very fortunate that the second red tail I ever owned, the first was a passage, that Dina was such a good bird. And I'm talking disposition. She was like a Harris hawk as far as her disposition. Well, really better because she didn't go. Well, she did go after dogs every now and then. She went after. She even caught a groundhog. Mm-hmm. But the one thing she wouldn't do, she would not go after jackrabbits. Mm. Which kind of amazed me that she had no interest in jackrabbits. She was a phenomenal. She caught pheasant. She caught quail. She caught a quail off the fist. Hmm. She was really fast off the fist because she was flown her first 2 or 3 years almost strictly off the fist. She got quite good at it. Red tails can if you fly them that way.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, if most of the time you're just hunting them out of the trees like it's typical, and they're not getting near as much that muscle built up and that flight time and everything, I can see where that.
Well, they get a different type of muscle built up when you're flying them off the fist from when they're young. Mm-hmm. Or passage red tails build up their muscles in a different way. So most of their, they're coming down out of a tree. Mm-hmm. So they're not going to be quite as good normally off the fist as a ice red tail would be, I think. But ice red tail is a lot more tougher to train.
Well, yeah.
I mean, they're the biggest headache on the planet usually their first year. Most of the other ice red tails I trained, they were that. You got to watch them the first year. They were a little bit nasty sometimes. But by second or third year, they'd grow out of that. And I found that ice red tails actually kind of get better as they get older. And it seems like the passage red tails' best years are their first couple years. And then they get pickier and choosy about what they want to go after.
Well, and then you start also having the hormone aspect of it kick in too, where you'd be flying them and then they just.
But you don't really have that with the ice bird so much.
Well, yeah, I can see that. I mean, for sure. But I mean, it's like if you fly a passage bird for 3, 4, 5 seasons, it seems like after a while, you'd be out in the middle of a hunt, and I saw a couple guys, birds do it. They see another red tail and they just want to go mate.
Usually ice red tails, they're focused on you and hunting.
Right.
And by the time Dina was 5 years old, she was phenomenal. I mean, she was. I decided that, and that's when she won the meet. And I told, actually, it was Greg Howe that gave me that bird. Greg Howe had that bird. He trained her. And she was and then he lost her for 2 weeks. So she was out in the wild for 2 weeks. And when he retrapped her, he went to college, and he called me up and wanted to know if I wanted her. So I said, yeah, I'll take her. Kurt Eicher had her sister. That's what that was. Kurt Eicher, and that bird was phenomenal, too. He ended up losing her, but they were both very flighty birds as far as very powerful flyers. Both of them were. She used to beat her wings on the glove, and she would raise off the gloves, and I'd be holding her with her jesses, and she'd be pulling on her jesses, pulling my arm. That's how strong she was. So she was just really physically and mentally, and just a really good bird. And I was very fortunate that I got a bird like that, especially an ice bird that way. I can't take all the credit in training her. I'd have to give some of that to Greg Howe, because he did originally train her.
Gotcha.
But he didn't have her very long, but
yeah,
I had her most of her.
So, I mean, we kind of briefly talked about, how things were different, before all the regs, were in and stuff, and how you pretty much, like you said, you could only, for a while there, get ISs and everything, but was that pretty much any type of bird, or was that just... Or
we could only have kestrels and red tails.
Okay.
That's all we could have.
Gotcha. So it was in the mid-'70s, you said, that the regs kind of changed?
I think it was 1975 when the federal regs came in.
Gotcha.
And then we could have, in fact, we could still take ice red tails. Mm-hmm. But why would you when you can go out and trap one? And I mean, I've had passage red tails out hunting 3 weeks after they've been trapped.
Sure.
And they just know what to do.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely
so much easier.
Yeah. I mean, I've had that conversation with several guys too, but I mean, it's kind of like what you're saying though. I mean, if you manage to get a red tail imprinted right, and it turns out to be that extra little bit of phenomenal, so to speak, then it's enough to turn some guys' opinions on the whole thing.
If you're willing to put, it's just like an ice goshawk.
Yeah.
They can, you can mess them up, and they can be meaner and crap too, but they can also be not so much that way.
Right. You just have to do it right.
You just have to do it right.
Yeah.
And ice red tails are no different. You have to do it right.
Yeah.
And I was good with ice red tails. Probably I'm good with ice goshawks as long as they're about 4 or 5 weeks old. And red tails are the same way. If you take a red tail 4 or 5 weeks, it's a lot better than taking one at 1 or 2 weeks. You don't want to take them too young.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I know other people would disagree with this, and that's fine. It's just whatever, you're good at, I think.
Everybody's,
That's right. Some people like
different.
The imprint Goshawk or the Cooper's Hawk or the Sharpie at the earliest age. Where I always like them about 3.5 weeks or older because their temperament's better, number one. And it's easier to find their weight because for me, an imprint, they lie to you.
Well, yeah, their weight changes, 4 or 5, whatever, however many times.
Well, that's like they're starving to death. They're not afraid of you at all.
Yeah.
So it's hard. It's a lot harder to pinpoint their weight. And if you take any bird out, in my opinion, out hunting too fat, only bad things are going to happen.
Right.
And it's easy to do with a early imprint. So taking an eyas bird at 3.5 or 4 weeks old, or even older, one of my best goshawks, Jada, she jumped out of the nest. I had to chase her down.
Yeah.
And she was a phenomenal. I put her right up for. If you take Dina as a red tail and Jada as a goshawk, it's almost the same bird to me. They both have the same temperament, sweethearts. I used to take Jada across this bridge on First Avenue, tuck her into my coat, and her head would be sticking out. And I could actually, if she was sitting on a table next to me, I could grab her tail and pick her up. And she would just look at me and just do this. Side to side, moved her head and look at me. What are you doing, But it didn't bother her a bit, and I'd set her back down. Her and Dina had those same kind of personality traits. So you can take an ice red tail, just like you can take an ice goshawk, and you can make a really good bird out of them if you're willing to put the work in to do it. It's just so much easier to take a passage bird to do it.
Sure.
But I think you're going to have, if you took a 4 or 5 week old ice bird, I think you could have a better bird long term if you wanted to keep the bird around for years.
Yeah, I can see where, that there would be some merit to that for sure. And I mean, there's all kinds of guys, like you said. I mean, if there's one thing falconers have a lot of, it's opinions and theories.
That's true.
But I mean, there's a lot of merit to that. I think also because, with the passage bird, also you're getting what the bird is pretty much already.
Yeah.
It's already been hunting. It's already learned how it wants to do something or whatever. And part of that whole thing with the passage, obviously, is training one. You're kind of learning its quirks too. And, if you want to fly a certain type of bird on a certain type of prey in a certain type of way, well, that bird might not want to do that. But if you're willing to change your mindset and maybe mold what you're wanting to hunt or how you're wanting to hunt to what you notice that bird might be better at or has already learned to do, then you might have a little bit more fun with it if you're willing to change your your mindset on it. But with a bird like you just described, like a late, technically like more of like a non-imprinted eyas, then you're teaching it everything already.
Yeah.
So
you have to teach it everything.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a situation obviously where it has no choice but to learn how you're teaching or what you want it to do. You still have to do it right, obviously, but it just, like I said, it just depends on what you're wanting to do.
Well, that's what I told Bill Rosenberger about Harris Hawks. I said, fly that bird off the fist as much as you can, and you'll have a good fist hawk, and eventually you'll have a good tree hawk if you want to. They'll do both as long as you start out with the fist.
Yeah.
But if you start them out in the trees, they're not necessarily ever going to be any good off the fist. So if you want a bird, you can fly off the fist. Well, Harris Hawk's a good fist bird anyway. But they don't like to sit on the fist. Most of them don't at first.
Yeah.
But if you train them that way, and Bill Rosenberger took my advice on that. He's even told me himself that was some of the best advice he got on. And that's how I did my red tails, my ice red tails. I flew them off the fist first. Sometimes nothing but the fist the first year. And, for instance, Dina not only was great off the fist for a red tail, she was also good out of trees. Because she could flat move out of a tree.
Yeah. I agree with that. I mean, it's the same thing as like if you for example, like you get someone transfers like a Harris Hawk to you that's, I don't know, say 4 or 5 years old or something, and they tell you beforehand, well, I've never hunted this bird off the glove or off the fist or whatever. Well, yeah, I mean, it's pretty evident that there's a lot of merit to what you just said with that too, because try and hunt a bird that's been hunting for 4 or 5 seasons off the glove and it's not going to stay there. Like, especially a Harris or one of those types, it's not going to want to do it. It's going to leave your glove as soon as possible and go for a tree or whatever.
Which I had a Harris Hawk, a little male Harris Hawk, that he just refused to stay on the glove.
But that was one you had transferred to you, right? If I remember right? Yeah, but he had never really been.
Well, he had been in his first year, but I think the second owner flew him strictly out of trees. So he decided he just wanted to fly. By the time I got him, all he wanted to do was hunt out of the trees. And I couldn't keep him on a glove. He baited and baited and baited and baited. And he was a 24-ounce male Harris Hawk, which loved to rabbit hunt. But if I kicked a rabbit up, he would fly over it, fly to a tree, and then go after it if he still had time. So, yeah, that it's just, I think, a good idea if you want. I mean, if you live out west or someplace where there's no trees, you don't have any choice to fly them off the fist.
Yeah. Well, or I mean,
and those birds are probably very good off the fist because of that, because they don't get hunted off trees very often. Really
great. I mean, I became when I flew that little bird that Dennis, Samney loaned me earlier this year. I became a huge advocate of the T-perch with that bird.
That would be good too.
Yeah, I mean, I became a huge fan of T-perches with that bird for sure. In general, I mean, especially if you're hunting jacks with Harris, like a cast of Harrises, 2 of them, you make yourself a T-perch that's big enough to hold both of those Harrises up there. And you're hunting jacks in those open fields like that. That's probably your best bet. Harris hawking with jackrabbits. I mean, it's your recipe for success is going to go up exponentially.
Ain't too many trees.
no,
too many trees in Kansas.
No. So, but yeah. So, kind of going back a little bit, I know we kind of went off on a couple of different paths with that and everything, but. You mentioned the like the artwork aspect of things, and it's kind of funny because I didn't realize until like a summer picnic of ours or 2 ago when I saw one of the paintings, like a print of one of the paintings that you had done. Like, I didn't even realize that you even did art at all or were an artist and stuff. So, how long have you been doing that? Since you're tiny, or?
Well, when I was 5 years old. I was looking in the newspaper, and there was a picture of President Kennedy. He had just become the president of the United States in 1960. So it was 1960. And I sat down with a piece of paper, and I didn't trace it, but I copied his picture on a piece of paper. And I told Mom and Dad, look what I just drew. And they accused me, oh, you traced that. I said, no, Mom, I didn't trace it. I drew it. So they made me sit down and do it again in front of them.
Yeah.
So, I realized that was something special because everybody made such a big deal. When you're 5 years old, you do something, I guess most 5-year-olds are just doing stick men and stick women.
Some 36-year-olds still, like this one, can barely draw a stick figure.
So I got interested in drawing and mostly dinosaurs back in those days. I was fascinated with dinosaurs.
Yeah.
And I used to draw old ships in school, and all through school I got pretty much straight A's in art. And I think one of the reasons why I got a B average in high school is because I took 2 art classes my senior year.
So, makes sense, yeah.
And a couple study halls.
Yeah. Well, the fascination with the dinosaurs, I guess that kind of makes sense on how you eventually started kind of liking the raptors and, doing some of the artwork of all that too. But,
I tried my best to get my dad to buy me a hawk from that magazine sale. What was that? Gross Branch or something. I can't remember the name of the place that was selling them, but they were always advertising selling hawks.
Yeah.
And
that's so funny.
I tried to get him to buy me I think they had a Savannah hawk for sale or something. Said, nope, ain't buying you no hawk. So.
Well, it's funny because there's been some other guys that Israel and I have talked to about that also, where it's just like, back in the day, you used to be able to open those catalogs and stuff, and you could buy anything from a Savannah hawk to a golden eagle out of the back of these magazines for, well, what would be the equivalent, obviously, today, or would be equivalent of pennies on the dollar, but yeah, I mean, there's guys that we've talked to that, they've gotten everything from golden eagles to red-headed merlins to whatever out of these magazines and stuff, and like, so you never got any birds that way?
No, I think I was in the 8th grade when I tried to get Dad. I saw a marsh hawk. Of course, I didn't know what it was back then, but I saw a marsh hawk fly real low across the ground when I was in 11 or 12 years old, and I tried to follow it, and it landed. So I tried to. I got within probably about 20 feet of it, and it was sitting there eating a mouse. And I was just totally fascinated with it.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So that's when I went back home and I went through some of those magazines, and I said, Dad, please, I want a hawk.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
You ain't getting one. Go get a pigeon. So that's what I did. I went out and got me a pigeon. So I raised a couple pigeons for about a year or so, but
yeah. Poor substitute.
Yeah, I didn't know I'd eventually be raising pigeons to feed the hawks.
Yeah. Is there anything in all the years that you, of course, you said obviously, physically and everything, you just can't keep up with it as much nowadays, which happens to tons of guys that in the sport and everything. But is there anything that you think that you would have liked to have done with certain types of birds or whatever that you just didn't get a chance to do? Or
my dream hawk was always a European goshawk, but I just never really could afford it, and I never could really, because I know how fragile goshawks are. I had one goshawk for 18 years. I've had one for 14 years. I had 2 or 3 for 6, 7, 8 years. But a lot of them, out of the ones I've flown, I mean, one of the best goshawks I had that I got from the Bighorns, she died through moat from West Nile virus.
Yeah.
And I've actually had a couple of them die from before they actually came out with a
vaccine
or whatever they got for them now. But and that really, Camille, she was such a, for me, she was a bird from, Jada died in 86, and then I get this bird in 2000, I don't know, early 2000s, 2007, I believe. So I waited, a long time to get another bird like that, and it really, you get a little bit longer, when you're 50 years old, you wait 20 years for a bird like this, and then you have a really good first season with it, and then it dies in moat, halfway through its moat. It's pretty devastating, really.
Sure, yeah.
You fall in love with these birds. And I've seen guys just quit. Now, I didn't just quit, but I tell you what, it did zap the life out of me a little bit. Because I got a couple other goshawks after that, and they were just mediocre.
Yeah.
And it does, and I'm sure I'm not sure I know I'm not the only falconer that's been through that.
Oh, I think that almost every falconer almost every falconer that does this with any regularity ends up with a bird that they just get totally attached to, even despite knowing going into it that you shouldn't. There's some birds just give you such fond memories that you just can't help but be overly sentimental about them. That being said, eventually you have to either, like you said, have to kind of get over it, or quit. Because I mean, if you get too attached and you can't get past that aspect of the sport, then it probably truly isn't the sport for you. Because every bird is gonna die. It doesn't matter if it's with you or without you or whatever. It's just like any other animal that you're going to encounter in your life, whether it be a cat, dog, hawk, whatever. Right. It's going to die eventually.
Probably before you, unless it's a golden eagle. It might outlive you. But that's another reason why I never opted to spend the money on a European bird. Mm-hmm. Because back in those days, if you wanted a German bird, or any of those other birds they were breeding back, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, you're looking at $5,000 or $6,000. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't see myself spending that much money, because when you see $5,000 land on a utility bowl, which I've had happen to me.
Yeah.
It's in one of the videos, one of my birds getting electrocuted. Mm. But when you see a $5,000 bird doing that versus one you went out to Wyoming to get, you might have
after trip expenses, 1,000,
maybe 1,000 in a total. But you had the trip and the memories of the trip too that you paid for. You just didn't spend that money just to get the hawk. Mm-hmm. But if you go spend $5,000 or $6,000 on a goshawk, and it runs into a fence or a window or dies from asper, or
anything, could be anything. Yeah, I mean, I get it.
Now you got your wife on your butt, and you got. It's just, to me, it just wasn't worth spending that kind of money on a bird when I could go out to Wyoming and get a.
Right.
Yeah. You take a chance even going out there where you're going to get a good bird,
or get a bird at all.
Yeah. We've been out there and not got anything. Me and Joe have been out there several times and come home without goshawks. Mm-hmm. And, back in the day, you had to leave 2 birds in the nest.
Huh, okay.
And you could only take them out of a specific area. If your permit was good for area 5 or 6, you could only take it out of the 5 or 6, or whatever area your permit was for.
Some states even still have that, depending on, they have those wildlife preservation areas that they won't let you pull from and everything else still. So.
And you never really knew what area you're going to get your permit from, because it was a draw system.
Gotcha, yeah.
So me and Joe went out there, I don't know how many times, and like one year we went out there and we found 2 nests. One nest had 1 bird in it, the other nest had 2 birds in it, and we had to come home without a bird. And we ran into the son of the head law enforcement agent in Wyoming. He was actually out checking nests that the state of Wyoming knew about. We ran into him. He was coming down off this mountainside. Mm-hmm. We got to talking, and we told him that we got 2 nest sites that he didn't know about. He didn't know about these 2 nest sites. We'll give them to him if he would just give us one that had 3 birds or more in it, so we could pull a bird. Mm-hmm. And of course, he said, "No, if I do that, my dad would kill me. So I'd probably lose my job."
Yeah. Well,
I said, we said, okay. Well, anyhow, me and Joe went home without a bird that year.
Yeah.
And that's not the only year. Yeah. And, you're taking a chance when you take a trip like that. But it's like I said, the trip itself, we just loved doing the trip, me and Joe did. We loved hiking around the mountains. If we came back with a bird, great. If we didn't, well, we still had a good time.
Sure. Yeah, and you kind of have to go out there with that mindset, beforehand. Like, you can't build those expectations up unreasonably, because if you do, you're just setting yourself up for disappointment. Nothing else. You just take a week to go and have some fun. Treat it like a glorified camping trip, and it's a bonus if you get a bird. It
is. But like in '92, where we found 11 active nests, and we helped several people get birds.
Yeah.
And we were able to do it always legally. And me and Joe were set on that. Mm-hmm. Nobody who we're helping, it's all going to be done by the book, because in the state of Wyoming, you do not want to screw around with the state of Wyoming. They will bust you big time if you go out there and do it the wrong way. Yeah. And why do it the wrong way when they're letting you do it the right way.
Yeah.
As long as it's legal and they're letting you do it the right way, do it the right way.
I mean, all it takes is for one person, or or for them to get wind of the one, just that one person. That's all it's going to take, in some of those situations to raise a big enough stink to, well, next thing you know, they just won't let anybody do it anymore. It's just,
that's right.
Yeah. So I get you. No, I mean, it's well, and the thing is too, is especially if you know where there's 11 nests or whatever.
Well, me and Joe, since we started going out there in 1983, and
the year I was born, by the way. Just throw that out there.
Well, I went out there in 78 or 79, so you were like a twinkle in your mom's eye then.
Yep.
But I took Joe out there in 83, and me and him went out there, not every year, but on and off, quite a few years. And we normally took somebody out, and we kind of limited it because we knew it's not that easy getting a bird out there. Even though Wyoming laws were probably the best in the country at the time. So Wyoming made it as easy as they could, really. Mm-hmm. So we always knew we had a chance to get birds. Now, in 92, we go out there and find 11 nests. And in like 89, 90, 91, 92, 93. 93 wasn't so good, but there was about 3 or 4 years there where we found a lot of nests. But we ended up with about 50 nest sites. Now, out of those 50 nest sites, usually only 5 or 6 were active a year.
Yeah. Yeah,
but it took us a long time to build those sites up.
Well, sure. I mean, that's the thing is
years.
Yeah. No, I mean, I know whenever I went out there with everyone. Well, I guess it'd be 3 years ago now. I mean, gosh, Randy and Mark did way more hiking than the rest of us. But heck, even the rest of us, I mean, dozens and dozens of miles over deadfall and everything else. Just looking for. And, went to 8 different nest sites and only 1 was active. I mean, they found that one nest, and it's...
and that's usually the way it is or was in Wyoming. We'd go through, when you try to walk 50 nest sites in a week. Just try it in Wyoming to those mountains at altitude. Just try it and see what it's like. It's not easy.
No.
And me and Joe did it for 2 weeks. We did the Goshawk thing for a week. Then we hiked all around the desert looking for prairie falcons because he wanted to take a prairie falcon. Mm. And then we came back down to Medicine Bow and spent another 2 days looking for goshawks. We did it for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
That would kill me now. There's no way I could do that now.
No, and even just a few years difference when I was more in shape then as opposed to now. I was telling some of these other guys about my... trip to Utah to get the prairie that I have now and stuff, but like we also went and pulled a peregrine, and how I was shocked really just to kind of see it with my own eyes, like how different the location of a prairie eyrie is as opposed to a peregrine eyrie. Yeah. But I mean, long story short, I mean the trail they decided to go up was 7.5 miles round trip, and that was just the trail, and that was also at a 70% incline. And I was totally not dressed for the occasion at all. And there was another 3 miles on top of that wasn't trail, and that about killed me. I fell, and I don't even know how many times on the way back down and everything. I was saying so many naughty words on the way back down that mountainside. Jeez. But yeah, it's crazy, man. I mean, it truly is different too, seeing like, so the way Joe and them described it too was, like the spot that we went in Wyoming. I mean, there's a lot of that area that's kind of been ravaged by those beetles. Yeah, the pine beetles and stuff too, and then all the logging they've done and everything. I mean, it's completely different. From the
logging thing actually helped in a lot of ways getting goshawks. I don't believe it ever really hurt the goshawk, because goshawks, number one, are very adaptable, and most of the goshawks we found were in logged out areas.
Yeah,
I can remember Eddie Morgan telling me when that first year he took me out there, don't look in the logged out areas. goshawks don't nest in those logged out areas. Well, me and Bob Bottomley went out there in 87, and we couldn't find any goshawk nest in the traditional stuff that Eddie Morgan was showing me. This is when I say I learned something that Eddie didn't know. It was partly by accident, but it was also partly like, you know what? I'm not sure I'll buy that.
Yeah.
So me and Bob Bottomley went around checking out, just driving down all these old logging roads that had been previously logged like a year, 2 or 3 years earlier. And we found 3 of them.
Yeah. Huh.
And what they do is, as long as you don't take out that strip of woods where the nest is, and you leave it connected to a larger section of woods, so they can come in and out of there without red tails seeing them, or ravens or whatever, they'll nest in there. And I remember one of the nests that I took a bird out of that year that me and Bob were there. It was the same nest that I took Jada from in 86, the year before. I went out to Bob to help him get a bird, and I wanted to get a second goshawk. So we went to that nest site, but it was all logged out. They were logging it the year I took Jada in 86.
Okay.
When me and Eddie Morgan went down there, they were logging it that year, and she had nested before the logging started. So Eddie Morgan thought that bird would never be back in here. I remember him saying that bird would never. Well, that bird wasn't back in there, but an immature bird was in there nesting in the same nest.
Jeez.
So the young adapt. And on top of that, when you get these young birds that are raised up in a logged out area, where do you think they're going to look for?
Yeah, that's what they know.
That's what they know.
Yeah.
So
makes sense.
Since that time, most of our nest sites are in logged out areas. Not in this primo 1,000-year-old forest that people, it's the only place a goshawk will nest. That's kind of what I was taught in the beginning. When I found out, that's a bunch of bunk.
Yeah.
And the loggers kept the pine beetles out. I talked to several of the forestry people there when the pine beetle infestation started, and the problem was the environmentalists in Wyoming were stopping the Forestry Service from going in there and cutting down those trees because they wanted nature to take its course.
Gotcha.
Well, you see what happened. Nature took its course.
Yeah.
And now there's no trees out there. There's no pine trees out there because the Forestry Service was prevented from doing their job, which they had done for 100 years. They've been doing it. As soon as the pine beetle infestation would start, the forestry people told me and Joe that they were allowed to go in there and cut. In fact, they'd send logging crews in there, and they'd log out those whole sections where those pine beetles were. Well, they weren't allowed to do that. So now look what's happened.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
you cry when you see it.
Yeah, it's barren. Like in some areas,
they want to blame it on climate and all this other stuff, but it's because they would not allow the Forestry Service to do what they've been doing for over 100 years.
Yeah. Well, there's only so much you can do about all that. Unfortunately.
Well, it's done now. It's gone.
Yeah.
The forest and medicine bow, it's gone.
Yeah.
But there ain't nothing I can do about it. So.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I feel you. Well, I mean, ironically enough, the one nest that we found whenever we went was in an aspen.
Well,
also,
and that's what they'll do. But the problem is this. When you cut all the pine trees out of a forest, the redtails move in. And when the redtails move in, guess what they do? They try to push the goshawks out.
Sure.
So the goshawks have to find a little niche now somewhere where there ain't a redtail. And believe me, that's hard to do because redtails love those mountains too.
Everywhere.
Occasionally, you'll find a redtail that tolerates the goshawk and they're nesting close together. Every now and then we found that, but not very often. Usually, the goshawk will get ran off the nest. They'd be killing each other's babies out of the nest. We've seen that. We've seen a goshawk fly right. We were underneath the redtail nest, and a goshawk came through and grabbed one of the babies and took off with it. And
wow,
we followed the goshawk, and we found her eating the baby redtail under a log.
How big was it at?
It was about a 2.5-week-old redtail.
Okay. Wow.
And she just grabbed it and took right out. Man, the red tails are screaming. But the red tails prevented her from nesting at all.
Okay. That's kind of nature's poetic justice then.
Right.
Yes.
And that's nature. And that's when the forest was still there. So you know that battle happens. What do you think's going to happen when the pine trees and the cover is gone for the red tails?
Yeah.
I mean for the Goshawks.
Yeah, I mean, it's...
The red tails are going to win that battle.
Yeah. No, I mean, it makes sense, but... Well, I mean, believe it or not, bud, we're actually at an hour already.
All right.
Yeah. So,
I hope I didn't say too much that you're going to have to edit.
Well, I'll just... Whatever. It's it's all good. I don't think there'll be too much in there that we'll have to edit. Except for the part where we talked so well about Mark, where I might have to cut that part out.
Yeah, we need to cut that out. Yeah. I don't know what I was thinking. What was I thinking?
Yeah, you weren't. But anyway, man, thanks for taking an hour out of your day today to come join me, and I really appreciate it. So it was fun, and it was fun for me too, because honestly, until today, I hadn't even heard the story from you as to how you even got into this. So it was kind of cool to hear for the first time. So. But anyway, appreciate it, man, and hopefully maybe someday we can talk Joe into joining us for one. We'll see.
It would have been nice if he'd been here to talk.
Yeah.
I think he had more important things he had to do. But.
Well, there's a lot of important things that are more important than this, but it's fun when it works out. So
that's true.
But all right, bud. Well, thanks a lot, and we will hopefully do this again soon. So
okay.
Appreciate it, bud.
Yeah, no problem.